Hello everyone and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
Hello and welcome from Philip and I to this special Motor Trade Radio weekday podcast interview. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Mark Busby, Commercial Director of Hendy Group. Mark will be a familiar name to many listeners for his 17 years with Hendy, helping build it from a medium-sized family business to a large regional group with over 50 sites representing 25 brands. And they include Stellantis, JLR, Renault, Dacia, Kia and Hyundai. And that's across the south coast of England from Devon to East Sussex and north to Surrey and Kent. The business can trace its roots back 165 years, initially as a bicycle retailer before moving into cars as the UK's first Ford agent in 1910, a brand it still represents across 10 sites. The group is also still family-owned, with Chief Executive Paul Hendy representing the fifth generation of the Hendy family. So welcome to the podcast, Mark. Great to have you on board today.
Thank you for having me, Philip and Curtis. I've been looking forward to this for a number of weeks now.
Fantastic intro there, and the bit of the background for the listeners there on the Hendy business, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and then sometimes you forget the rapid growth since really 2016. And often when you listen to someone else talking about it, it kind of reminds you about the journey that we've been on.
Yeah, and what a journey. But we'll get onto some of that shortly. So, welcome to the podcast. I know it's something that we've been trying to get you on for a while, so we eventually got you on. So I'm really looking forward to this one. Now, you know, Hendy is one of the longest established franchise groups in the UK. I mean, what's your take now on how it has evolved as a business since you joined?
Yeah, so I actually joined in the year 2000 through an acquisition. But I had a brief spell where I emigrated to Australia in 2006. Clearly didn't work out because came back in 2007. And I think it's the journey that we've been on is really quite transformational. And I think I remember working on contributing to strategy documents about how we might grow. And then when we did grow significantly in 2016, that effectively doubled us in size, both in terms of geographical footprint, brand representation, number of dealerships, and turnover. And I would say that was probably one of the most pivotal moments, both for the group and for me professionally in my career. And I think at that point, there were some brand synergies between Hendy and the Lifestyle Motor Group as it was, but there are also some new brands that came into the portfolio, probably most notably Renault and Dacia. We now represent those brands in 8 locations now, so it's grown and grown from there. So it's been absolutely transformational.
And was that the acquisition of the Lifestyle Europe?
It is, absolutely, yes. Who were predominantly based in Sussex, Kent and Surrey.
And I suppose that in hindsight, as you said before, was that a transformation, change of that significant growth at that point in time?
It absolutely was, yeah. It absolutely was. And I think, neighbouring counties to the counties which we were in, so there were so many synergies that you could kind of capitalise on. I guess marketing for one, you got crossover of territories, so it really was a bit of a game changer for the group.
And looking at the business today, following that acquisition, you've achieved what looks like textbook coverage across the south of England. What does that geographical spread mean in terms of the brands you represent?
I think if I go back to 2016, that we doubled in size then. I think what then followed in 2019 was the acquisition of Westover Motor Group. and that grew us by a further 50%. So then we had kind of everything from Sussex in terms of county coverage all the way to Devon, with really no gaps in between. There was, again, some brand synergies with Westover, but there were new brands that came to the portfolio for us. Examples of that would be Nissan, would be Jaguar Land Rover. So it enabled us to build a brand portfolio that now sits at around 24, and great county coverage in the south, which, as we know, is a pretty affluent area. So it gave us a really good footprint, but I think also importantly, it meant that from the centre being Southampton, no site was any more than probably 2 to 2.5 hours away, which I think is quite important from a visibility point of view, and being able to touch and feel the business on a regular basis.
And as you say, you represent 24 brands. Would you consider growing by adding brands? And I only ask that because you did actually add Vauxhall last year in Dorset. So are there any brands out there that you would still like to represent and add to the portfolio?
Well, I think we partnered with Stellantis last year, and in that particular location in Poole, we represent in a single showroom Vauxhall, Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat, and Abarth. So kind of 5 of the Stellantis brands in one destination. We then added Vauxhall to Salisbury, and more recently, in the last few months, we've opened a Vauxhall and Peugeot centre in Tunbridge. And I think Stellantis is an interesting brand. It's got good coverage in terms of product in key segments, B and C segment, which we still continue to see as an opportunity. And there are always opportunities that present themselves. You just have to explore them in detail, do the analysis, and work out whether they are the right fit. And do we have some premises for it? Because that's the key. The stars need to align for these things sometimes.
And any thoughts on representing any of the new entry Chinese brands, especially some of the pure electric ones?
It's an interesting one, that one. I think I would say that we were an early adopter with the Chinese brands in terms of we opened MG in Exeter, I think back in 2016, maybe 2015, and we now represent that brand in 3 locations in Crawley and Poole as well. They're always interesting. I looked at a report over the weekend which we purchased back end of last year, and I think there were like maybe 35 to 40 Chinese brands that may or may not be coming to the UK.
Yes,
it's a really interesting one. Kind of which horse do you back in that race? It's because there's some great product. There's some fantastic looking product, and the tech looks amazing, sounds amazing. I've driven some of the cars. They're very, very impressive. Very impressive. So again, it's about the right opportunity at the right time in the right location.
Yeah, and it is, like you say, it's just, as you say, it's backing that right horse, isn't it, on that?
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think there's enough room for all of them currently. I don't think, in our market. What kind of market share do you need to achieve for it to work?
Yeah, that's the whole question, isn't it, sometimes, that they all quote, we want 10% market share. Well, 40 brands can't all have 10% market share, can they?
No, they can't.
Just by pure mathematics, there's only so much the market can take. So,
and that's before you even think about the incumbent brands that are already in the market.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, something more recent, Mark, and you and I talk, about the used car market. And in October, you launched your own customer car buying service, Hendy Buy a Car. Do you want to tell us a little bit? And it's quite an obvious one of what prompted and how the service is going, and maybe as a follow-up, what challenges you've been facing around sourcing, that good quality used car stock.
Yeah, and I think what we recognised, really, this goes back to 2020 when COVID hit, and we've seen some crazy things happen since then and now, of course. But I think the disruptors who really accelerated their activity in terms of buying cars from retail consumers on the basis they may be able to achieve a better deal on the car they want to buy, we saw that as an absolute risk to our pipeline of stock for our used car operation. we've been working on this concept for a while. We've just gone through something of a soft launch. We'll be looking to ramp that up in Q1. And this really is probably more about us having some representation in this space of the market for just pure acquisition of stock. But I think more importantly, when we're selling to consumers, we need to understand why there is no part exchange if there isn't one. Because to the best of my knowledge, we don't sell many vehicles to first-time buyers. So therefore, by default, the customer has arrived in something into one of our showrooms that got them there. And I keep sort of saying to anyone that will listen, really, buying the part exchange is really as important as selling the car that we've got right now. And we need to really understand why there is no part exchange, because that's our future. So it's really, internally trying to amplify a message that we want to buy as much as we sell, particularly as a part exchange. And as I say, we'll start to ramp up our activity on Hendy Buy Any Car in Q1 next year.
So I suppose is that what from what you're saying there, there's as much about being in that space and being able to buy the cars and reaching customers to buy their vehicles for stock, but also a message to your customers that actually we want to buy cars. We are in the market of buying cars. It's part of what we do.
Yeah, I think it's that message is to our customers and internally across the business. Buying is as important as selling right now, and it will be for the foreseeable future.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on a special weekday episode of Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising.
Now, Mark, it's been just over a month since the budget, and I'm guessing some of the dust would have settled by now. So how would you sum up the impact of the rise in employer national insurance contributions and the increase in minimum wage on Hendy as an employer?
Well, I mean, as every business would have done, we've calculated the on cost there, and you have to wonder where it's going to come from. And my conclusion is there are probably the obvious action to take is we're going to have to increase our charges out to customers. And I think this is one of the things that perhaps the government haven't considered in terms of when you make these sweeping changes, there is someone has to pay for it. Someone has to pick up the tab further along the line, and I can't see that we can absorb that on cost. Well, I know we can't, so therefore we have to look at how we recover that on cost through either driving incremental sales or putting costs up, whether that's cost of labour, whether that's cost of vehicles. But we're in a marketplace which is very transparent right now, and will remain so, I believe. So, everything we do with our used vehicles is priced to market, so it's hard to recover it through there. And then you go, well, actually, we'll just need to improve our conversion on inquiry. So we'll introduce a number of measures in our business planning process for next year that will look to cover those increased costs off.
And that in itself sounds like quite a big logistical exercise, just preparing all that as a result of the budget and making sure everything's in place for the group for next year.
Yeah, it is. I mean, fortunately, we've got a really skilled team that can interpret the budget changes and quickly model what it might look like for us. So within a couple of days, we knew what we had to make up elsewhere. So and then the plans are put in place to see how we can do that. And then we're just getting the business planning process for 2025 now. So we'll have a clear indication on how we're going to cover that off in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and just staying with the budget, would you have liked to have seen more in the budget to stimulate retail demand for EVs?
Absolutely, yes. We find ourselves kind of in no man's land with EVs at the moment. I think everyone is a bit paralysed on kind of what to do, and we desperately need the government to do something. I'm not entirely sure what they should do, but there needs to be absolute clarity around what the objectives are and how they plan to stimulate a market to see that the EV proposition is a good one. Um, I think it's a real challenging one. I guess it further underlines some of the external complexities in 2024 that we've had to deal with.
Yes.
Add that to the budget, add that to the cost of interest throughout the year. It's been some real unprecedented kind of snowball of things that we've had to deal with. But do you know what? We're all a resilient bunch in this industry,
Yes.
and we find a way.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I mean, we always talk about the automotive industry being a resilient sector, and we've faced that over the decades. But it's truly been tested, hasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I didn't even mention commission disclosure in that.
I was just going to get onto that. I mean, that was the next question. I was just going to say there, Mark. We can't have you on without obviously talking about the Court of Appeals ruling on obviously the commission payment, and more importantly, I think having you on as a the retailer side of things, because obviously there's a lot of conversation about the bigger impact of this and what it means to asset lending in the B2B, B2C space. But as a retailer, has it had an effect, and how has you as a business have you responded to what's been happening?
Yeah, so I think on that day, that Friday, we were a little bit surprised on the ruling. We thought, okay, well, look, we'll think about how we manage that on the Monday after the weekend. But there were some lenders that took very decisive action, both late on the Friday afternoon and over the weekend, where there was a pause on business being written, which kind of left us, some of our retailers, in a difficult place where they were in that kind of phase between order and handover, and some of those handovers were scheduled for the weekend. So we had to be really nimble and agile in terms of giving our teams the tools to manage that. And then, but by Monday, we'd worked on how we were going to manage the commission disclosure. We've got a great team of people in compliance and in commercial F&I who kind of worked up how we could be compliant, how we could give our team the tools to be compliant. And we were ready with most lenders on Monday / Tuesday. So what we saw was a bit of a pause, a bit of a reset, and then us having to talk to our teams about how they confidently present the amount of commission in the finance agreement. And I think it's fair to say it's been pretty seamless, which probably took everyone by surprise. I think most consumers accept that there is a level of commission that underpins the whole transaction. And we've seen little or no resistance when presenting commission. But it was a bit like preparing for COVID in many ways. And I've kind of thought back to 2020, and now we were planning for what felt like Armageddon, but actually it wasn't. And if you just kind of pause and think about it rationally, what we had to do was pivot to the way that financial services was working anyway. So whilst it felt like a big leap, when we actually got to it and actually started talking to customers, the journey was relatively straightforward.
And Mark, that really goes back to the resilience that you mentioned, within the car retailing sector. And of course, if that wasn't enough, over the course of the last week or so, there's been plenty of discussion of the ZEV mandate, following calls from OEMs, to look at it and reconsider the way that it's being applied. And of course, Stellantis' move to close the Vauxhall plant at Luton, citing that low uptake of EVs, and the government now actually entering into some consultation with the industry. So as a retailer, how has the ZEV mandate actually impacted you as a business over the course of this last year?
Well, I think the biggest problem that consumers don't know much about it. And you might argue, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not entirely sure. I think what we desperately need is clarity in terms of pricing between ICE and EV. And I think if you want consumers generally to change their behaviour or do something different, you have to incentivise them. I think there are various models around Europe where you can see incentives have made a big difference. And I think what we had is this kind of 2030, 2035, we had two different objectives. And I think that's added to the problem. And also, what we've also had to deal with or contend with is the supply issue around ICE versus EV, and it's really been quite challenging for some of our teams. So, our teams in the showroom, I absolutely feel for, because they've got to manage an inquiry where the customer is kind of maybe thinking about kind of one line, which may be an ICE vehicle. We're showing them actually, well, these are the other options that are available, whether that's PHEV or full EV. But it adds a degree of complexity to a transaction, because before EV, everyone's driven a petrol or diesel. And now we're talking to customers who have never driven an EV, but are absolutely anti-EV. But when you talk to them about, have you ever driven one? Well, the answer is no. Maybe you should try and have a test drive in one to see what you really think, so you can make an informed decision. I think there's so much propaganda out there as well, which really doesn't help either. So the teams are managing incredibly well despite these complexities. But absolutely, we need the government to incentivise the transition, 100%.
Yeah, and as it stands at the moment, Mark, how would you actually describe the sort of level of retail demand for EVs?
I think there is demand there, and there's a level of interest. I think the price, there needs to be some price parity in some kind of way. When I was considering my options, you look at the cost of public charging versus the cost of charging at home on a really good tariff overnight, and you go, well, actually, that's quite compelling. But of course, not everyone can charge off street. So there needs to be a range of solutions that addresses a mass market, so that consumers don't feel there are any obstacles or any friction points in them making that transition. But the first thing we have to do is to incentivize that behavior.
And Mark, just finally now, we're near enough at the end of 2024. How would you reflect back on how we've just gone through some of the challenges and the U-turns and everything else that's been affecting the motor retail sector? But how would you reflect back on Hendy as a business over the last year in terms of car retailing and after sales? And more importantly, what are your hopes as we sort of enter now into 2025? What are you looking at for the year ahead?
If I think about 2024, as I said earlier, it's been probably a year of unprecedented external factors that are outside of our control, but how we manage them is within our control. So, I mentioned earlier we've got, higher interest costs than ever, although there maybe is a little bit of wind behind us on that one, hopefully. New government, that always has an impact. We've got the stuff going on with the ZEV mandate, and then we've got the budgetary implications that we're managing our way through. So, despite all of that, I think our teams have done an exceptionally good job. But for next year, I'm looking for a fairly dull year in terms of these external factors, so that we can just get on with doing the job really well. And I think what we have to do is to make sure we do the basics absolutely brilliantly, and arm our people with the tools and the knowledge they need to kind of present compelling propositions to customers in showroom, particularly around EV. So whilst that may not be particularly exciting, I'm hoping for some dullness, if I'm honest, so that we can just kind of focus internally on kind of getting our bits right in our business.
You just want a bit of stability, a bit of calm.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. Keep calm. Just and I think you made a point there. Just control. It's the whole thing, isn't it? Control the controllables, the back to basics. What
you got it.
the retail sector is good at.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to a lot of people today that probably hoping the same. That can we just have a year with nothing?
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Can we just have a year that we just buy and sell cars and service them,
and try and keep it simple.
Just keep it simple for us, yeah. Just keep away from everything else. But I mean, it's huge. Like I say, been trying to get you on for a while, Mark. It's been fascinating. I think getting you on for 20-30 minutes to cover some of the topics of the sector was always going to be challenging, but I think we got there. And I think the opening bit of the size and the group and what you've been through and the time and the fact you're still obviously privately owned, etc. I mean, it's hopefully the listeners have really got a bit more understanding of the Hendy Group and obviously where you've come from and where you've come to today. So fantastic, and a huge thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Curtis, for inviting me and your patience in me joining you for a session.
You're more than welcome, Mark. Many thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, that is all for now. So many thanks for tuning in this week. We hope you've enjoyed this special weekday show. We're back with the headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, on your podcast feed.